Okay, well, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to our special meeting of the working group to develop the draft framework for the task force to examine police policies, et cetera. I'm sorry, the name of this group changes a bit over time, so I don't have that right in front of me, but that is what we're here to do. In front of me, I see that we have, as I just went through, I think we have all the members of the working group here with us. And in our agenda, I see we have 3 attachments: the action minutes from the last time, a draft framework brought to us by staff, and public comments received. And I want to thank the public for reaching out and giving us those comments. It looks like our agenda is very similar to last time, where we talk about the charge, the composition, and the reporting structure, and the timeline. And so I wanted to start with the charge, because I don't think that's not specifically called out in the draft framework document, as far as I could tell. But we did end up at the last meeting with a charge that was iterated, or that was spoken by the consultants, and I think we all agreed on that charge. And I think, actually, if I can, I'm going to I'll read it to you again.
Mayor, I just wanted to let you know that YouTube is live now.
Oh, okay. So we've resolved that problem with the live stream. Thank you, City Clerk. Appreciate that. So what we ended up with at the last meeting with the charge, and let me go ahead and see if I can share my screen, just because I think it'll be easier to make sure that everyone hears it all. And apologize, I'm going to be sharing my entire screen, but I think you will just see the document, unless my computer is uncooperative, which it might be. One moment. Okay. The share is not coming up right away, but let me read the charge as came to me in the notes from the consultants. It was 3 items. Number 1, to examine policy and practice that have negatively impacted community policing and relationships. Actually, it's 4. Okay, I'm uncertain, and maybe the consultants can clarify this for me. It looks like there are 3 numbered items in your notes, but it might be 4 items. So to reiterate, examine policies and practices that have negatively impacted community policing and relationships. Data collection to identify key racial equity challenges to prioritize. Research best practices in other jurisdictions. And define communication pathways of various stakeholders to include community input as well as progress of work. Is that 4 items or 3, Ms. Anderson?
It's actually the 3 bullet points, and we discussed that one of those were kind of a sub bullet point under research. That data collection was really part of that research conversation. So I'm not, against it being 4 bullet points. It was just recommending that we not, take on too many bullet points and trying to give a clear charge for the group. So.
Okay, thank you for that. One moment, I'm sorry. I am sharing my screen, which I don't. I apologize. There we go. So there are the, as outlined in the notes that I received, if people can see that. Try to make that a little bigger. Oops, went the wrong, did the wrong thing there. So do we still have agreement on this charge, on these charges? And I see the Vice Mayor has her hand up, so Vice Mayor, go ahead, please.
I have a sort of a point of order, but I'm also having a Zoom question that if you're sharing your screen, I'm not seeing it. And I just have 6 of us kind of squished up in the corner. So I'm confused about that, and I'm not sure how to solve that. But what I wanted to say was the charge actually is on the document. I think it's the charge of what this body is to do. And I think what you just described is more what we're hoping the task force will do, what we're assigning to the task force. I think they're 2 separate items.
Yeah, correct. And so that's what I saw in the draft framework was that was the draft framework for the next body. So I wanted to make sure, I think that an output of this body should be the charge of that next body. So I wanted, and that did not appear in the draft framework. So I wanted to go over that. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I think the word charge should probably be different because when we looked at charge originally, it was the charge of this body, not the next one. But are you sharing your screen?
I am, but it appears that I might have to restart my Zoom. It's acting a bit funny. I've had this happen to me in another recent meeting. Is anyone else able to see my screen?
I can see your screen, Mayor.
Okay.
I can't.
And so, Vice Mayor, if you go up to the upper right, you might be able to. Are you using an iPad or a computer?
I'm using a MacBook computer.
Okay. So in the upper right hand, you might be able to switch between, I think it says speaker view or some other view. If you click on that, that might help.
Don't wait for me.
Okay. All right. So that, I realize this can be difficult sometimes, but I think it would be appropriate to make sure we're still agreed on the charge before we move forward into the rest of the meeting. Are there any other comments on the charge of the next body?
I do.
Yeah,
It's hard
go
to
ahead,
be seen.
go ahead, Greg.
Oh, go ahead. You can go first.
No, you might be thinking the same thing as me, so.
So
ahead.
one thing that was confusing to me about the document, so what's listed as the draft framework, which is listed as the draft framework for the task force, which is for the next body, if I understand it. It does have a charge listed, and the charge there is actually quite different than what we had talked about. So that was, I was uncertain of sort of how that came to be, because that says a task force on community policing and relations to encourage open communication between the community. And I think this language, as was pointed out by several of the comments, this language didn't reflect our discussion. So I'm not sure where that charge came from. And it appears to me that what we are developing and what we seem to have developed last meeting was what the charge would be. And I think we need to make sure that that's reflected in our documents. I also, given what was said last time, think that it's crucial that, as was said by all last meeting, that we're not trying to construct dead ends. We are trying to construct a body that can consider everything. That includes, in terms of understanding best practices, includes examining forms of oversight. I think if given this shift in charge seems to have, encouraged some of the comments about whether they're seeing a drift away. And I think we can assure people that we're not drifting away by just formalizing that we expect the next group to talk about that. Obviously, City Council will be the one to act upon it, but we don't want to construct a scenario where we seem to be constructing blind alleys.
Would people recommend that we replace this charge with bullet points and or reformat the bullet points as we previously came up with into this charge?
So I'm going to ask the question, kind of piggyback on what Chair Downs mentioned. So the framework, I'm not sure I'm familiar with where the framework came from. I feel like that was maybe a recommendation, but I don't know if it was a discussion that this group had yet. So I think the notes that you're referring to, Mayor Pilch, is when Dr. Shelley had mentioned that in the last meeting, we would take more detailed notes. I know that there's kind of the city council meeting minutes that everyone sees in public, but this was more of like the details. And I know going back to that meeting that was recorded, this I think really captured the conversation as best we could. Obviously, there's some details that have to be fleshed out, but I think these were when we talked about the charge, it was what this working group was charging this task force to do, is what I understood. And that the charge of this group, I mean, you are the charge, right? You're the ones creating this platform of a task force. So that's what my understanding was, but I'm not quite sure what the framework is referencing or where it was developed, because I'm not sure that the group was part of that, but I could be wrong. I could have missed it, so I apologize.
Well, I think I can clarify that, and the city manager can certainly chime in after a brief introduction. So the city manager did come up with the framework, I think, based on the last meeting. And the thing that, and I think it took into account our feedback from the last meeting, but what I noted, and the reason why I wanted to go into the charge first, because I did note that the charge seemed to be different from the charge that we as a group, as a working group, came up with in the last meeting. City manager, did you want to add anything to that? And I apologize,
Sorry.
I can't.
I had too many screens open. I'm just, so yes, it came directly from your minutes, which are also attached to your agenda this evening. The words were literally taken from that document. So in terms of the notes, Mayor, that you may have from the consultant, perhaps those weren't incorporated into the minutes. I'm not privy to those notes, unfortunately. So that's probably where the disconnect is. But when I see, we're toggling documents here, which is going to be confusing, but I see, Mayor, in the bullets that you have on the other document, if you look at the second paragraph of the charge as written for the agenda, at least, let's see, those, perhaps not verbatim, but a couple of those items are included in the draft framework document that you have. You'll see communication. You'll also see policy and procedure, researching other practices. Basically, that whole section there is included as paragraph 2. Perhaps not in the words that the group wants, and that's certainly up to discussion and direction by the group. What is attached to the agenda is intended to help you build off. It's certainly not set in stone. It's a draft framework so that the group has one foot going forward in terms of making a collective decision to send up to the city council.
Yeah, understood. So this is intended to be just a simple rewording of what we discussed the last time, but it did appear to me to be different enough from those bullet points we'd come up with that I thought that merited discussion, because it would be important to if people felt that there was a significant difference between what's in the working document, the draft framework rather, and the charge that we came up with last time, it would be important to resolve that before we go much further, I would think.
Absolutely, and happy to cut and paste the charge that you have there with the 1, 2, 3. Happy to put that into the framework as it moves forward, whatever works for the group.
Any more comments from the group about that then? We could just copy and paste those bullet points and also include the rest of the charge from the draft framework as well. And I see people in the audience raising hands, and I do want to get why don't we go ahead and get public comment on this item then, because I think it's pretty important. So it might be a good time to do that. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see the people. And our city clerk, would you let those in who wish to speak?
Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. Yeah, I'm noticing this. I can't see the full screen you're sharing, but are you inviting any member of the public to be on this committee? I mean, I know myself would love to be on this committee, or just a neutral member of the public, because you know, you have all these people from other committees. They already have so much stuff to do. You want someone from the school board, you want someone from this, from that, from this, from that. They're already overwhelmed in their job. You know, when people run for school board, they run for school board, not to be blindsided the fact that they got to be on the subcommittee for a community policing task force. They're supposed to focus on the school district. So it's like, here you are making all these committees to where you have your own people in there making decisions, and you're not letting it to where members of the public have an opportunity to really be part of the task force, because that's what you want. You want the members of the public to be involved, because in my situation, my RV was towed by the police department. Meanwhile, Sergeant Betancourt, you guys are finding me a place to store my RV. So one day I'm on the phone with Betancourt saying, okay, he found a place for me to store it for $300 a month. Okay, that sounds great, Betancourt, let's do it. And then the next day my RV's towed, it's gone. It's like the police department was working with me to get a place, to get it out in front of the city hall as a blight to our community. But you guys were working with me, but at the same time against me. So there was no communication within the police force that Sergeant Betancourt was working, and Sid, community developer, was working on a place for Jeremiah to put his RV. And you guys had found a location for $300 a month, but at the same time, the same week, you tow it. And so someone's homeless living in an RV, if you really want to help them, but now you made them even more homeless. So are you really trying to help? Because I just don't get it. Because you made my situation worse by towing it before 72 hours, but at the same time, you guys were trying to help. Sergeant Betancourt, we're trying to get you a place to store it. So obviously this police does need this task force, because I got it to where you guys were coming after me for $5,000 to pay the tow company for towing my RV. So now you want me to pay $5,000 out of my pocket, plus now I've got nowhere to stay. Now I'm homeless on the streets, but I did have a roof over my head, which was my RV, but you took that away from me. That's all I got to say. So obviously this police force, we need a lot of improvement. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Downs. Chair Downs, you are the man. You are so professional in the way you lead the Social Economic Justice Committee. You are very.
Thank you.
Jeremiah, your time's up. Go ahead, Corey.
Hello, working group members. Wow, almost asks, how are you? Hi, I'm a little bit scattered, that's fine. So, I hadn't seen the notes with the 3 bullet points. Those are definitely, I think, closer to what members of the community have been asking for in the over 100 defund the police comments, and in the form letter and otherwise. I am still a little concerned that research best practices needs to be broad enough to include alternatives to policing and not be restricted to community policing. And that was my major concern with the draft framework language as well. And I'm not sure it's explicit enough in these 3 bullet points of this, this spelling out of the charge. So much of this is about policing is not the right solution all the time. And that includes community policing. And this task force needs to be able to talk about other solutions. And I do not think that that is too broad. I understand being scared of that, but I think that there is a real risk of narrowing it here into becoming a PR thing for police, to make police look good enough when police don't have to be the solution. And that is what we've been trying to say. And I know that sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle, but that's the core essence of it. And that this, you know, also it being the title in the draft framework was that it would be a task force on community policing and relations. The centering around community policing is really not what I believe we're asking for. Certainly not what I'm asking for. But also I have about 100 people that I send messages to, and I hear back from, you know, maybe 20 of them. And I think a few have submitted comments. I see like 5 or 6 sending comments on time today and sent them to the city clerk, so they got in the record. Mine, I forgot to do that, so it's not in there. That's okay. But yes, I really, there's a hyper focus here on community policing, and research needs to include prevention and alternative responses. And those are 2 different things, because prevention is making sure nothing happens. And then alternate responses is if something happens, does it need to be police that respond? And that includes, does it need to be community police that respond? Because I don't think it does have to be. And that should be part of the charge, is to be figuring out what that looks like. So I just want to really emphasize that that needs to be broad enough so that, you know, they're not held back by, no, this is your scope. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Go ahead, Tim.
Mr. Stroshane?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
I'm Tim Stroshane, an Albany resident since 1994. The draft framework suggests that we have a misunderstanding about our police department, and this is a red herring. It's not misunderstood. The department needs unveiling. People in Albany want the Albany Police Department to be accountable to the public to the extent that it is needed. The purpose proposed by the working group, and I recognize that you've been dealing with the charge issue at the outset of this meeting, but the purpose that I was reviewing needs to include researching and recommending alternatives to calling police to deal with safety situations, and what steps Albany can take to do more to prevent crime and violence that does occur in our community. It's vital to this process that the task force define what safety is for the many groups making up our community and acknowledge ways by which safety can be achieved without armed police involvement. This will also be useful for reevaluating priorities for the city's budgeting and resource allocation process. The draft framework's charge needs to make clear that the task force shall demand and acquire information about what APD officers do when contacting members of the public. Task force members need a common set of facts from which they can deliberate on our city's true safety needs. The present composition proposal must commit the task force to broader representation from people actually affected by policing practices here. I list examples of such groups in my email to the working group. There should be just one representative from the business community, someone capable of representing both the San Pablo and Solano Avenue corridors. The seat freed up by such a change should be allocated to either faith-based or other at-large youth or senior individuals. The draft framework should specify that different religions shall be represented from among Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, and other faiths. It will not do to have only Christian sects represented. If the freed up seat is applied to faith-based groups, 4 different religions should be represented. At-large representatives should each be persons of color, and I want to thank you for considering my views on the draft framework for the Task Force on Community Policing and Relations.
Thank you very much. And I want to apologize for not noticing, thanks for the members of the public. I apologize for not noticing that the notes had only been sent to me. So I'm going to go ahead and forward them around to the members of the working group, and I think they probably should be posted to the public as well, so we can get those out there. But I did not. Apologies for not noticing that those had only come to me. So anyway, yes, Ms. Anderson.
Yeah, so just a point of clarity. So the just going back to the discussion we had at the last meeting, there were notes that were being taken, I know from Nicole, to what you noticed was the document that was shared with the public. The particular notes that Dr. Shelley and I took were more detailed notes that were more around talking points and ways to really kind of help with facilitation of the meeting to kind of keep the structure going. So that was not intended to be a public document. It's still not intended to be a public document. And that's where I think the confusion may have come in. I think Nicole's notes were the framework, which is again, developing kind of where we're going. And so I don't even know the word framework kind of throws people off like this is everything set in stone. We're not there yet. We're still at what is the charge of the group, the task force. We have to go to roles. We have to go to the composition. So we have to kind of build on those. And so I think what Nicole's, as city manager, her notes that she took were more detailed notes that normally aren't given to the public based on how you share your meeting minutes. And I don't know, Nicole, if that makes sense around what our discussions were, but am I calling that right?
Not necessarily, but perhaps we can just focus on the working document and try and blend whatever folks recall into that document and move forward.
Okay. And
Yeah,
so maybe
I think there might have, sorry, go ahead.
No, just responding, I think this might be a good opportunity to just clarify again roles. I think in our last meeting, Dr. Shelley had shared that we were taking some detailed notes as consultants, because remember, we're supporting this group, but we're also supporting multiple groups. So we want to make sure we're aligning information, but also want to make sure we're clear on what our roles are so that we don't have any future confusion around, again, meeting minutes and also around kind of building that framework, which was shared earlier as well. But the notes that we shared was not intended to be a notes that were shared publicly. It was just to give talking points around what we captured from our last meeting. So I hope that helps.
Okay.
Okay.
Understood. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification. Just like as I took notes that I wouldn't want to share because they would reflect badly on me just because of their how chaotic they are. I understand the nature of these notes. Okay, so apologies for the kerfuffle. I think the essence I want to get back to is that I remember those bullet points that we arrived at, and I think we arrived at after a good conversation at those bullet points, and I just wanted to make sure that those are captured somehow. And so I think, can we move on and say if there's an agreement that those bullet points will make it into the next document, and would people be agreeable with that statement? It sounds like yes. Oh, Chair Downs, go ahead.
Just quickly, that'll be the carryover of our charge rather than the charge that's included in the document packet under charge of the draft framework. Is that right? That'll be our charge for the next group.
That will be the charge we are giving to the next group. That is my understanding. Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. Great.
Mayor,
okay,
if
so
I
we
may, I don't know if the group is intending on another meeting, and if you are, then this is probably moot because you can work it through then. But if we're working to finalize that document and submit it to City Council as part of this meeting, I would want to make sure that we have it clear in that charge, what you're taking over from the notes, since I'm not privy to those notes, just to make sure that staff has everything they need to compile this into a draft document to forward to council.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll forward those notes as they are to you so that you can use that in your work, City Manager. I'm feeling like we might have to have one more meeting to wrap this up. We have a hard stop at 6, and we definitely want to make sure we're all in agreement and on the same page. So, and that's perfectly fine. So, okay, so I think we've arrived at agreement on that the part which is the charge. And now if I have to reorient myself.
Is it okay
Yes.
to repeat what the charge is for the group? I think we did this at our last meeting. Like, what is the charge, and make sure everyone has a clear understanding. I think that would be helpful to move forward to the next item.
Okay.
I know there's a little confusion, but I know last meeting we literally repeated it and said there were 3 bullet points. We all agreed to those. I think Chair Downs also spoke to those as well. So I don't know if we need to reinvent anything new. I think you all really kind of accomplished that at your last meeting. So just repeating it, make sure it's clear, so you all can move to your next agenda item would be really well. I don't know if you have to continue to carry on the charge. And I do want to speak to one of the public comments, kind of went into the details of what the task force would be doing. I think this group really needs to think about, again, you're just giving a broad charge, and the task force is going to do the work, right? The task force is going to unpack all of the things, the nuances that need to be addressed. So I don't think this group is designed to go deep into the weeds. It's just to really come up with what is the basic vision charge for that task force. So I hope that helps a little bit. I think a better use of your time. I don't think you want to go too deep into the weeds because you do have a hard stop at 6 as well. So is it okay just to repeat the charge so that everyone can have that and Nicole can have it as well, and we all can make sure we have the same understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, I'll just share my screen again. For me, it's much easier to see the words. And hopefully there's not too much clutter on my screen here. I'll read them now as well. Examine policy and practices that have negatively impacted community policing and relationships with data collection to identify key racial equity challenges to prioritize. Research best practices in other jurisdictions. And I did hear some public comments about the best practices. We'll get back to that. And number 3, define communication pathways of various stakeholders to include community input as well as the progress of work. I will say that I think that what I feel sometimes in the when you do give a broad charge, sometimes people feel that some important points might be lost by the next body to whom you're giving the charge. On the other hand, as you're right, Ms. Anderson, that body will be doing the work, and it's not our job to get into the weeds about it as well. So let's see if we can have any final comments about whether we need to change this charge or not. I see the Vice Mayor's raised her hand, so go ahead, please.
Thank you. Number 1, who determines which policies and practices will be examined? I mean, how do we decide that?
I guess I'm not certain of the question.
It says examine policies and practices that have negatively impacted community policing and relationships. How do you determine which policies you're going to examine?
I see.
So I can help you a little bit with that if you want. So the data collection was kind of that sub-bullet, and that's where the data collection determines what you want to prioritize. And so there's a lot of different practices and policies, obviously, that are impactful, but to prioritize those is going to be data that the group would also have to be a part of collecting. So I think there's some unknowns right now in terms of what that looks like. And so I think that's where the task force really helps to determine that and prioritize it. I hope that helps a little bit, Vice Mayor.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other comments? The only thing that I heard that might be an improvement, but I don't want to get into the weeds about this, is I did hear some comments about best practices, whether we wanted to, I might suggest that to capture public input, we could add and alternative practices in other jurisdictions. I'm getting 1 thumbs up on that. How do people feel about that? My apologies. My computer is freezing, alternatively freezing up and not freezing up on me, so I'm unable to finish this here. But research best practices and alternative practices in other jurisdictions is what I mean to have there. Everyone okay with that?
I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with this all of a sudden. Best practices and alternative practices. What are alternative practices? I mean, I know what I think they are, but what is meant by that here?
Well,
I want to be sure we're giving no clear direction.
Yeah, I think what this captures, what I'm trying to capture here, and what I think I'm trying to capture, what I'm trying to capture from what I think the public is saying is that we have current best practices. For example, the Minneapolis Police Department was using current best practices, but what there's a call for is a re-examination of, are these really the best practices? Are there new best practices we should be coming up with? So that's what I intend to capture here.
Well, first of all, the Minneapolis Police Department were not using the best practices, and I think that's been fairly well established. So yeah, you have to be kind of careful what you say. I guess what I want to avoid is going into a rabbit hole of making it too broad and not ending up with a successful outcome.
Yeah, to clarify, I certainly don't mean that their actions were the manifestation of best practices, but rather I think there's an agreement that the Minneapolis Police Department had training in all the best practices and consider themselves to be following the best practices, but the application obviously was horrible and awful.
Right, but I know we're kind of belaboring this point, and I understand this, but this isn't about the Minneapolis Police Department. This is about the Albany Police Department, and that's what we need to focus on.
Well, I don't want.
But I'm yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I want to capture somehow that if, you know, the best practices might not include new ideas that most police forces are not using, or, you know, new ideas that will become best practices, but that are not yet part of the usual training or usual procedures and policies. I'm just trying to capture that somehow, that being forward-looking is important as well as examining current practices, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And Chair Downs?
If the Vice Mayor is good with it as written, then it's fine. I don't want to belabor it. I support the way you've rewritten it. So if the Vice Mayor's last comment indicated that she does, then I do. Now it's gone away on the screen though. So.
Sorry. I think that I was sensing that the Vice Mayor was not comfortable with what I had added.
So then I think the point that, I understood, you was making, as well as some of the commentary we received, is that we don't want to define it so narrowly that it feels as if we're telling the next group what they're to do is to look at what other police departments do and assess that, but instead we're to look at what other cities do. And so there are cities that have, both, have implemented things within their police department, of which, there's a number that haven't been implemented here. But then there are also cities that have defined the different ways of addressing safety, and that the task force should consider, this sort of wide palette of possibilities as they determine what they think is the best way forward. So I like alternative practices as a nod to that.
Or I could, one thing that occurred to me is I could replace the word alternative with possibly new practices.
I think alternative is fine.
Okay.
I just don't want, they've only got 6 meetings, or we'll talk about that, but at this point they have 6 meetings. I don't want them to just go down a rabbit hole of unlimited possibilities. That's sort of part of my concern, but let's move on.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. So I'll go ahead and share this with the city manager. Great. It seems like we can move on to the next item in our agenda then. And give me one moment to get back to that. And I feel like I'm continually apologizing in public meetings for my computer. Anyway, I am back at the agenda. Next item B under item 2 is the composition and appointment procedures and reporting structure and timeline. So I think that is my understanding is that what the draft framework intends to include as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, city manager. So perhaps we ought to talk then about item B, which is the composition and appointment procedures. And I think I have some thoughts there, and we'll likely have some other comments as well, I'm imagining. So are there, before we go to the public on this, any comments from the members of the working group? Or should we just go to the public first? Yes, Vice Mayor.
I think I'm trying to do the math, and math is not my strong point. I think we've got 18 on here though. And I think, is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, we have 18, and I think we would prefer to have an uneven amount.
Okay.
Can we include dog as a community service organization and put it into that bucket and then remove it as a standalone?
That might be one way to do it. Sorry, they would become part of the faith-based service organization community?
Yeah, that seems like it's a bigger bucket.
Okay. I think that works for me so far. Anyone else? Thank you for sharing. Yes, Chair Downs.
So I think I appreciate you catching the 18 versus 17. And I think there's, a bunch of ways we could nip and tuck to get there. I think it makes sense to lay out, what our principles are in portioning it, and also to be thoughtful about what is the body that's going to make some of the selections. One of the things I liked about a diverse housing working group is it was clear who would make the selection. Some of the others, it's much less clear. And so, it's clear the city council will ratify them. And so I worry that we've got several where it's not clear how who gets to speak for faith-based service organizations, especially since they're 2 different groups, in some circumstances. So we have service organizations that are not faith-based, some faith-based organizations that, may or may not have service components. So who's going to get to speak for that? and make those selections. So those are the two things I want us to keep in mind. We have lots of ways we can get from 18 to 17, but what are we doing and how are we, why are we doing it, and what's going to be the mechanism for getting that list of names?
Okay, thank you for that. Please. Ms. Anderson?
Yeah, I will add another piece to this. I know that this list is kind of, identifying key stakeholder groups in the city. And I want to keep in mind that there's going to be also the process of even doing outreach to gather the group of people who are going to represent this task force. But I am concerned that there's two things going on. One is there's not a calling out of specific groups who have been harmed by police. And so when I say that, it's historically marginalized groups of people. So it's not called out here. And what I understand, it's hard to, call it out in this space because you're going to like groups, right? Like represented groups who already have an established body, which is not a bad idea. But I do want to say that in the process of outreach, it's going to be important that in that interest form, and I know we'll talk about that a little later, is that we call out really when you're talking about the application process, who's going to go through the people who are selected, that it's very clear that you have clarity on ethnicity and culture, that you have clarity on not just your faith base, but also your, there's a variety of what I call spiritual journeys that people have. So we want to put people in a box. There's also the sexual orientation space. There's the space around just economic levels. There's so many people who need to be at the table in terms of the marginalized groups. So these groups are called out, and a lot of these have spaces of power. So you're going to have to wrestle with how do you balance this group of people so that when the feedback comes, when the research is done collectively, you have a broad range of what we call diverse perspectives that are non-traditional. And I think right now, this is a very traditional list, which makes a lot of sense because you have established bodies in these spaces. I love that you have the school district in there. You have youth in there. You obviously want to look at senior citizens and those who have been in the community for an extensive period of time because they have history. But I also want to make sure that we're really clear about calling out the groups that need to be at the table who have historically been marginalized and need to have a voice. Because if you don't have those experiences, then it's going to be very difficult to be able to make decisions moving forward. And I think that speaks to the question that Vice Mayor Peggy mentioned about, how, in so many words, like, how are we going to really know what data, like what are those best practices? And I think some of that comes through your data that you're going to collect through those voices that historically we have not heard, the experiences of those. So I think there's like a multiple things that will happen in this process here, but I just want to point that out that we're missing some people, and we're going to have to be really clear about the outreach process to make sure you have really a diverse perspective that's in this small group of 17 people, but yet very large group when you talk about a working group like a task force. So I hope that helps.
I appreciate that. Thank you for those comments. All right, so how about if we go ahead and take public comment at this point and then come back to the discussion. City Clerk, would you let the members of the public who want to speak in, please?
Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, hi, working group. This is Corey Dosty. Yeah, so first of all, reducing from 18 to 17, the simplest solution as offered in the emails was that the mayor gets an appointment twice because he is a member of the city council and there are 5 slots there. And then the mayor is City of Albany mayor or mayor's designee on the city council. So that is one of the simplest ways. I agree with everything that Chair Downs and Consultant Anderson said, and I thank them very much for having heard me through my emails and trying to communicate ahead of time about all of this. Yeah, and I also want to specifically call out in terms of groups historically impacted, there's a unique perspective from people who have been incarcerated, who have been arrested, who have ended up in the prison system, who have experienced that criminalization. And that's going to be really crucial to have included in terms of talking about, is it being done right? And I think that might be hard to formally seek out, but that again, yes, the naming that when you're doing your outreach and your application process and making that safe for folks to disclose, right? Sure. But that we've managed to say that yes, victims of violent crime need to be represented, and I agree with that, but also folks who have been targeted by policing and experienced incarceration need to be represented. And I think that is a voice that's very rarely heard. And yes, gender identity, which is distinct from sexual orientation. Trans people have very different experiences than gay folks. And I really want to uplift Muslim and Sikh folks, Sikh. Muslim folks are targeted by law enforcement for surveillance after 9/11. I don't know the extent of that here, but I do know that we have apparently about 2% Muslim population compared to 1% nationally and in the state. Here in Alameda County, it's twice as much. And I know that there is a mosque, I believe within the city limits, there's at least a community and a mosque very nearby. And I think that among the faith-based, yes, it needs to not only be like different sects of Christianity. I think it should specifically be folks who have been targeted, and sometimes it isn't, entirely about race, but it probably is. But yeah, I think that Muslims and then Sikh folks are mistaken for Muslim, that voice, like naming, right? I understand not wanting to get too wordy, but it's the balancing of narrow versus broad. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Go ahead, Jim.
Hello, this is Jim Beller. I didn't quite understand the proposal to fold dogs representation into the community service organizations. So dog wouldn't be guaranteed a spot at the table. And I would like to have our group represented there by at least one person, because we do have our unique experiences with people who tell us about being targeted by the police for being homeless or not having, just trying to go through Albany with a shopping cart full of recyclables. Or we've heard a lot of people say they just don't want to go into Albany because they don't feel welcome there. So I want to make sure that dog does have a place at the table. That's really what I had to say. I also wanted to support everything that Corey has been bringing up. I think that they've done a remarkable job of researching this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Perfect. Thanks for this lineup. So, it seems like I was targeted. Obviously, I felt targeted, specifically by a few officers, especially O'Connor. He'd come by my RV in the middle of the night, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and knock and bang on my RV, flash his lights in there. Hey, Jeremiah, you got to move. And you know what I tell him? Sorry, O'Connor. Good night. I'm sleeping. Go away. And he would drive away. But I would do it respectfully because it's a municipal code. I'm not breaking any laws by parking my registered vehicle that I pay Geico insurance on a state highway. San Pablo's a highway, 123. But O'Connor keeps wanting to harass me in the middle of the night about a municipal code. Well, he's not supposed to enforce municipal codes, And then he wants to arrest me. Okay, I'll go public. I was arrested a couple years ago by the Albany Police Department for possession of stolen property, which was not mine. There was a scooter, a homeless person dropped off a scooter. I got married, okay? And he dropped off a scooter with a note saying it was dropped off by him, his handwriting, some homeless guy. I'm not going to mention his name, but he gave it to me as a gift. Homeless people are weird. I don't drive a motorcycle. Ask my parents. I will never get behind one. Okay, they're too dangerous. Anyway, long story short, I was arrested, okay, forcefully he gave me an Indian burn with one hand, okay? And then when I get to the court, the district attorney throws out the case. Albany Police Department doesn't even show up. 2-3 times, 2-3 court appearances, O'Connor never shows up. Never, nobody shows up from the police department. Then the judge says, district attorney, what would you like to do? The district attorney says, we'd like to just dismiss the case. We'd like to drop all the charges against Pinguello. And everybody says, what? That never happens. The district attorney drops the case? Never. Because I was innocent, but I was attacked by the Albany Police Department because I identified as a transient. Not a race, but I was identified, not race this time, but I was identified as a transient. Not Jeremiah Pinguello, former Albany High School quarterback, former third place in league wrestler, former baseball pitcher, struck out Dontrell Willis, going to Long Beach State, overall GPA 3.73, Albany High School, going to Cal State Long Beach after high school. Now I'm a longshoreman working. But you guys wanted to attack me when you all knew I was injured. That's why I was in an RV, because I was injured from the docks. I got injured at the Port of Oakland. And you guys were attacking a disabled person. You guys are attacking a disabled handicapped person. I was disabled and handicapped, and you guys are attacking me.
Time is up.
Thank you. That's all the time I needed.
Go ahead, Bart.
Thank you, committee members. I'm really not sure what you're trying to accomplish here with this representation, and what the rationale is for the various groups that you're including. For example, while there are good people in DOG who really have important things to contribute, DOG is the diverse housing working group. It's not the diverse police working group. In terms of faith-based services, many people in Albany are not faith-based. And I don't see what faith has to do with policing necessarily. It's also unclear to me why you're lumping faith-based and service organizations together and what you mean by service organizations. Why not allow people to apply to this task force the way you do with commissions? Consider yourselves, what are the kinds of people who need to be represented in this community? I think Nicole's point about people who represent groups that really have been subject to oppression by police is very important. I think that's more important than having people from service organizations or the business community. So I don't understand the reason for constraining this rather than allowing Albany citizens who are interested and concerned to apply for it, and then you select the people who best represent the groups that need to be represented. Otherwise, I'm afraid you've constrained this so much that you're not going to get anything new out of this, and you're going to wind up missing the people whose voices really need to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Go ahead, Julie.
Hi, thanks. I'm glad Bart spoke before me because I was going to say something similar, but I think he expressed it better than I can. I'm concerned also about trying to divide people into certain categories and then pull from those different categories. I think a general application would be sure to cover what you want. And I also agree with Nicole Anderson about not making sure that you don't leave out people who have been negatively impacted by police actions. I think the danger of not spelling out exactly what you want is that you could end up, if you with these groups, with all white, Christian, cisgender, straight, people who have no experience of incarceration and no experience of homelessness or any other economic challenges. And you don't want that to happen. So I think it would be much better, behoove you to make a list of the people that you want to be sure are included, and then put out an application. And when you look at the application, you can say, okay, look at everybody we've got. We want to balance this. We want to have young people, we want to have older people, but we want to be sure to include people who have, as Nicole Anderson said, what did you say, variety of spiritual journeys. I think all of that, so really it's the application actually that's going to turn out to be the most important part, how that application is put together so that you can select people that represent a real wide range and a diverse group, and people maybe that you normally don't listen to or don't hear from, or who don't attend your meetings because you so poorly advertise them, which I know I bring up every time. I just want to point out that, again, there are a lot of people who aren't here who probably would like to be here if they knew about them. So thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. Next speaker. Oh, or is that it?
That is it.
I think that's it for speakers. Okay, very good. Well, I just want to say that I appreciate the comments once again. One thought that, and I appreciate Ms. Anderson's comments as well, or Dr. Holtz, I'm not sure which consultant made them. I think it was Ms. Anderson. That we want to make sure we include marginalized groups. And my thought also is that the people who have come to speak to us about their treatment by the police in many different forums have been Black people and other people of color. And I want to make sure that their voices are represented somehow, or if that makes sense. I do have concerns about the composition, but I also don't have any answers, but I hear some good ideas here. Let me throw it back to the group for other comments.
I'll say, Dr. Shelley, I don't know if I'm reading your mind, but you made a comment at our last meeting about a group that's really integral that was not shared on that list, and I may have missed it, but I think it's about policing. And
it's
so,
about, well, I wanted to bring us back to two things. One, echo the, I just got a good look at the framework document, and the framework document did pull one of the perspectives that were shared. I believe it was Vice Mayor Quay's perspective, but there were several other layers of this that were shared that night, one of which was around the diversity of the groups and ensuring that various factions of the community were included. And a piece that was also missing was the involvement, or how the involvement of the Police Officers Association, and the police officers' families. And the reason this becomes a critical piece to add is because police officers do not come to us without a community behind them as well. And by just including the community at Albany, and since really around the 1980s, 1990s, there was a shift from police officers being based in the communities they serve, and there's been a huge shift of police officers that are coming into the community from surrounding communities. So there's been a difference, and many times there's not an accounting for that differences in practices and policies. So just ensuring that we're considering that. And to return to the notes on that, we also spoke about, there was a third group that was spoken about during this, and my apologies, it's coming up slowly. The third group, there was the diverse perspectives, and then the other piece was the outreach for the groups. And so really considering how was that outreach going to happen, because there was a conversation about mailers, there was a conversation about whether they were going to drop them off at libraries, and different ways to reach out to the community, and ensuring that as you compose this group, people understand they are representing a certain faction of the community. How are they now going to communicate with that faction of the community, and then relay those communique back and forth to the task force, so that really this task force gives tentacles out to the community that are represented in this room. Thank you.
yeah, so just
Thank
kind of
you.
piggybacking on that, I don't know what that looks like for the composition. It goes back to numbers, because again, not having officers on the task force in terms of representation, I'll say that from the officers, is going to be a really hard space to be able to move the agenda for it, because you have to have all stakeholders at hand. And I think that's going to be a critical piece. So I'm not sure how that, changes numbers, but I do want to echo what was said in the public comments is more about the process. I think it was Commissioner Grossman mentioned about the process, right? is that although you have kind of an idea of what you want the task force to look like, when the applications come in, that can look very different. So I want us to hope the group will be okay with the non-closure of you don't know who's going to apply. It could be you outreach to all those groups and nobody's interested. And I don't believe that's the case. But I do want to say that once you put out the interest form, and we, Dr. Shelley and I actually have a couple of ideas about how that could look to give you an idea of, how will you get that composition and know the diversity that we've met this kind of diversity criteria. Just knowing also that you're never going to get it perfect. And the community has to understand that it's not going to be perfect, but the intention and the strategy to really outreach as best you can is going to be critical. And then again, for those that don't get to be on the task force, there has to be clear communication about how they can still be involved in this process, because it has to be, there's only so much space, so everyone can't be on it, but there has to be a way that people can still engage. And I think that in itself is going to create a different nuance. So I'm not sure about sharing that document, Mayor, on the screen or just sharing verbally. It's just, again, some of our working notes, so we can definitely share it with the group. And if we need to, for point of order, send it over to you for your notes and documents, it's fine as well. So I'm not sure, Nicole, if you want to clarify how that would look, or Mayor, how that would look.
So, sorry, this is the document that is the application, you're saying, is a suggested application or idea for an application?
Yeah, so it kind of moves from the composition to like, how are you going to fill those spots, right? And so maybe asking particular questions. So I don't know if I'm too premature, but I think it's part of this agenda item. So we definitely have some ideas to share and help the group move along on that as well.
Yeah, since that's a document you can share. Certainly you could share it at some point. You share it now, I think, if you want to, if you're prepared for that, or otherwise we can come back to you.
Yep. Yeah, I wasn't sure if others had comments though before, because I didn't want to go too hard.
All right.
Competition.
I'll just put it out there. I mean, that certainly was suggested that we could, instead of requiring representation from groups, we could instead say, well, we think we want representation from these groups, and make it even a longer list, and then allow anyone to apply. I'll just put it out there that that's a direction I think I would be okay with. But what do my fellow group members think? I'm seeing one nod from Chair Downs. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just think that's the good part of this is, as people have said, that if there's a little bit more centralization, there'll be an ability, that comes at certain losses, but there'll be an ability to assess whether the group being put together is diverse in the ways that you want. Whereas if we're farming out each piece of it, we may well end up with all 17 people assembled from the different pieces before we realize, where things have potentially gone astray. So, and conceptually, I like it.
Okay. And Vice Chair Gary, I thought you might be ready to speak there.
I wanted to agree as well that I think that's probably the best way to do it, instead of trying to put a list of what is needed. Just have everyone apply, and then we just go through and we put the group together. I think that'll be fine. So I appreciate that perspective.
Thank you. Sorry, Vice Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you. I keep hearing put a list or do whatever and we'll decide. I'm a little confused as to who the we in this is. I believe that the council will be making the appointments. Is that correct? So
I think we agreed upon that last time.
Right, okay.
Yes.
When people say we, I'm never quite sure who we is.
The last meeting, you stated it, that you wanted this group, this body right here, to decide on the appointment. If you want to do something different, that's fine. But I noted from the last meeting that you guys, because that was the question I asked, because as I was really interested in who's going to decide the body, because if you're coming up, remember I mentioned that if you're just coming up with the criteria, then you need to be very specific if the next group is coming. But if you're coming up with the criteria and you're going to be making a decision, then you don't have to go as in depth and saying everything that you're looking for, because you're not talking to another group, you're talking to yourself. And so If it's going to now be the council, again, it doesn't matter to me, quite frankly, either way, but you just got to know how specific do you need to be if you're now going to take your ideas and then plop them on another group to implement.
Yeah, I believe my recollection is that we discussed both ideas, but we settled on the city council. But I don't know that. Perhaps I'm misremembering that there was consensus on that. But I think it was the city council. I think, and because we are the appointing, I think it was stated perhaps by the vice mayor that we are the body who does all the appointing. So I'm okay either way if people may want to make a strong. I think you have a good point, Dr. Holt, about that. But you know, I don't have I could go either way.
So it sounds like this group, again, is looking at composition, will develop an interest form, questions, put it out, do outreach to the groups, to the community, that those applications come back in. This group takes a look at those applications as a whole to see, make sure we have diversity, look at those groups that we really want to make sure we have representation for. That 17 people comes up, that 17, this particular group recommends to city council as a whole to decide these are the folks we're going to appoint. Am I saying that right? So this group kind of represents the working group that recommends based on the applications come in. Is that what I'm understanding? Because I know that was a clarifying question that came up as well.
Yeah, no, I think we might not be in agreement totally on that one. I think I would be, we could consider a hybrid approach where we do that, where this body has one more meeting than was usually scheduled, and considers the applications and then brings them to the council to ratify. Now I recall, maybe that's what we said. We could do.
Mayor, may I jump in just to clarify? In checking with our city attorney based on your last meeting, should this should this group wish to have authority over the application process to any degree, that would need to be directed by the city council. So if it's the collective agreement of this group that that's what you would like in terms of appointing or reviewing those applications, my suggestion would be, as you follow the direction currently given by the city council to prepare a draft framework for the task force, that's basically what you're taking back for action, that it be included as a ask in that document, that this working group would also like some authority over the selection and appointment process, so it can be formally designated by the council with the authority to do so.
Yeah, thank you, City Manager. That sounds like the right way to go. There does seem to be interest in this body and weighing in on the selections, but we can bring that as a formal item to be approved by the council at one of the upcoming regular council meetings in September. Let's if there's no, oh, sorry, Vice Mayor, I see your hands up now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, I think that it's up to the city council to, just like they do every other advisory body, they get the applications and they appoint the people. We certainly can give them guidelines of sort of who we would like to see. And I don't mean who by John Jones, but what categories we'd like filled. I'm not sure the correct way to say that properly. But it is an advisory body of the city council. They need to make the appointment. I don't think this body should be doing that.
Okay. Well, then are you okay with I do hear a request from this body. So are you okay with it being brought to the council for a yay or nay? Council could say, no, sorry, we don't want to do that. We just want to approve them ourselves.
No, I wouldn't want to do that, but I'm only one person, so.
Okay.
I think
Yeah, I'd prefer to do that. Dr. Holt?
I just want to clarify that the point I'm making is that regardless of which way you go, if you go the route of the city council choosing, that can work and it can work very well. This body just has to be very specific. So in looking at the draft framework that was proposed, we would need to make sure we include the recommendations for the diversity that was asked for at the last meeting, and that isn't in the current draft framework. You want to make sure you include the recommendations for all the things that folks have been saying. I don't want to go through them all, but you just want to make sure you include that very explicitly, because they may or may not have watched this whole meeting. So all they're going to have is that draft framework to go off of. And so again, if you don't want to go that route, you may not have to be as specific. That was my whole point in saying that, was just about specificity in the framework document to speak to the conversation that was had.
Understood. Good comment. Thank you. And Vice Chair Gary has her hand up. Go ahead,
Yes,
please.
thank you. Thank you, Mayor. You know, my concern, I mean, I have fears about this. My concern is that if we turn it over to City Council, that we're not going to get the representation that we're looking for. And that concerns me. So somehow either myself or Chair Downs or someone needs to be a part of that process, because we understand what we're trying to do. This group, if we want to do it, I just have concerns that we're just not going to get the representation that we need to represent this task, this force, to get things moving forward. And that's just my concerns, but I just wanted to put it out there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, it's not that we necessarily have to reach consensus about everything. I think we discussed at the beginning that we could bring back to council options as well. And so I feel better about bringing this back as an option to allow this body to weigh in or not. But at the very least, I do think that Dr. Holt has the point that we do need to record what we intend in the composition of the body, what we intend in terms of diversity, et cetera. I think that's important no matter what. So, but getting back to if we could get back to the composition, there is the idea of specifying the organizations we draw from, or having that list, or perhaps a bigger list of people that we would like to hear from, and then taking the applications as a whole and picking and choosing with that diversity lens, or with that lens of making sure that we capture the impacted communities. Any consensus on that? Shall we go the route of not being specific? I saw there were a couple of head nods previously. Anyone? I would prefer to go that route. Anyone else want to give their yes or no?
I mean, can we take a vote and just see where we're at instead of just waiting on someone to speak, and then we can go from there? Can we do that or no?
How about we take a little straw poll then?
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, just with hands raised.
I don't know what I'm raising for. I'm sorry.
Sure. I think there's the idea that we either we come to a conclusion about the list. I think that originated from you, where we have one member from this body, one member from that body, et cetera. Or we just say we wish to have a group of citizens likely from this group and with these criteria as well, and we just allow the whatever applications to come in, and we might get a dog representative, we might not. For example, dog being DHWG, the Diverse Housing Working Group. So I think that those are the two ideas. We say open to anyone, but here's who we'd like to see, or we say we're definitely going to have representation from this group or that group. Does that clarify, Vice Mayor?
Thank you.
Okay, sure. So how about the straw poll of who would like to see it open to anyone with direction, without specifying exactly which? Okay, we've got We've got 3. And who would like to specify exactly which groups?
I think I would, but I'm not, I'm fine.
Okay. It sounds like we could go that way, and I'm comfortable with that because I think that the consultants seem to be saying that they have some ideas about how to present that in the application, and we could perhaps look at a draft that they come up with at the next meeting and approve that as the application. Any other comments? The Vice Mayor.
I'm sorry, my neighbor's having a crisis and I need to run next door. I'll be right back, but I just didn't want to leave you in.
Oh, okay. I hope everyone is well. So when I said I'm not sure I got consensus from the consultants, or rather, do the consultants feel that they have something that they could come up with as suggested language for the application?
Yeah, I think we have something that will help kind of start the process. I don't ever want to tell you like this is exactly how you should do it, because I think there's the spirit of kind of the what works for you, but we can share some ideas. And again, what's going to happen is there's a combination of things. You have your groups that you're going to want to outreach to, but then you're also going to have people who are interested, and that may not always mesh. So I think it's being open to, again, this group may be people we expect, we don't expect, and that's why we have to kind of wait, have a closure, a deadline, and then pull them all in and make a decision from at that point. I think there's a lot of unknowns. Yeah. You can share, absolutely, and then we can share it if you want to add that to the meeting minutes for next time. That's perfect. Do you want me to just share our screen, or?
Oh, sure. That'd be great.
Okay, let me try it and see if it'll work on my end. Let's see if I have permission. I think I have permission. All right, so it's just literally, let's see if I can move this over here. So can you see it okay? And I'm not sure if it'll blow up big enough, but literally this is, you can see it okay? Perfect, yeah. Okay. So this is literally just, I don't want to use the word framework, but just kind of thinking around how you can craft. I use the word survey because that's typically what it looks like, because it can be online, it can be by mail, it can be if someone has to go on the website and hit the link there. And in some cases, it could be someone doesn't have access to anything. They just want to tell you over the phone because they don't know how to write, right? They don't have the ability to answer the question in the same way. Or maybe they're blind. And there's so many different things that you got to really kind of consider. So I use the word survey just loosely. And there's multiple ways you can ask these questions. So again, the purpose is really to, again, like in there, you want to give a clear purpose so that they understand what the survey is even about. So we just put some language in there around what they actually should understand what this is about. It's about a task force, and clearly getting that piece. Maybe, putting the charge in there might be helpful of what the purpose is. Really more of an outreach of we're just wanting to get your interest and your perspective. So what happens in this, just to be clear, I put questions. And one of the things we talked about is the fact that because everyone can't be on the task force, this can also represent some form of perspective around informing the task force work in the future and informing some survey questions that may be asked later on. So this is data that you're collecting while also collecting an application, if that makes sense. So some of the questions will help you to get perspective. And these are things that you may want to think about as you ask in future surveys. You want feedback, so we want to be consistent as well. So again, this is literally just kind of throwing thoughts to consider. It is not by any means what you have to do. It's just to get a process started. So the demographics, just simple things, right? Their name, their address, phone number, those things are really simple. And again, we don't want this to be super long. You don't want people to, fall asleep trying to fill this out. But then there's some diversity indicators, what we talked about, like how do you have a diverse group of people? So one is asking the role that they represent in the community is going to be important. So when you're talking about those faith-based groups, right, all the business community, if you want those groups, you want to ask them to actually indicate that. And I'm not sure if this is big enough. Is this big enough for everyone? I see Chair Downs going, okay, I wasn't sure if you could see it okay. And so with that, asking them about their roles, asking them about their gender, that was important, asking about sexual orientation. And of course, there's, and I don't want you to feel like, how do I say this? there's language that you're not going to get right because you're going to miss some things, right? And so there's so many different ways to call out people based on sexual orientation. So LGBTQ plus, for example, there's a lot of additional words that could be placed in that piece. So you want to just be clear, like this is the best outreach we want to do, okay? But you want to understand that we may miss some folks. And so kind of big category, sexual orientation, gender. I put mental and physical ability because it's important to recognize that everyone may be differently able. So you want to really have an opportunity to have language that's crafted so people can share what may be a challenge for them. So you understand, again, what might be the issues that you're missing when we don't talk to people who have been disenfranchised because of being identified as disabled in a lot of spaces. I put other in there because you want to always kind of leave it open for people to fill in an open-ended question with other. Ethnicity and culture is important. Notice I didn't put race because we're trying to interrupt institutional racism. And so when we unpack what race actually is actually a social and mental construct to be able to divide people. So we're talking to people about why don't you interrupt even using that word and identify people based on who they are, which is based on their ethnicity and their cultural identity. So that's where that comes from. And you want to give them, you can do the census options if you like, because that's what people are used to filling out. But then also I would add in an other to ensure that you don't miss people, because the census, unfortunately, just by the sheer nature of it, it doesn't include everyone based on how they identify. We talked earlier about religious, spiritual beliefs. I think that's going to be important, and leave it open-ended because there's a lot of different ways people can identify. This one is a tricky one around socioeconomic status. And so how you word this is going to be important. Thinking about the different income levels is going to be important. Thinking about people who may be impacted by homelessness. And then also language. So when you kind of add those 8 spaces together, that speaks a lot about who people are when you talk about diverse perspective. Okay, now there's another piece that can help you be a little bit more mindful of, okay, their interest, right? Like, why do they even want to be on this? So that's going to be important to ask that. So why are they interested in being on this task force, and what issues are they particularly interested in? And this is where I think Vice Mayor asked about, again, what are those best practices and what are we going to actually unpack? Which practices or policies do we unpack? This gives you a good indication as well of what kind of things bubble up to the top for people, okay? And so it kind of helps you start to think about, hey, we can maybe focus on this area, this area. People are going to share that in this interest form. And then the other piece is, what does racial equity actually mean to them, or how do they define it? Okay, so it's important to have context for where people are coming from. And this also will eliminate people who may just want to be on it just to be on it. And I don't want to disrespect anyone in the community, but there have been spaces where people just like to be involved, but don't actually have context for what it is. So you want people to really have an understanding of this work, and people are really going to be what I call intentional and passionate about it. So you want to ask them, what does it actually mean to them? And then the other pieces here to consider is the communication piece. How do people communicate, right? So this would help us. I think this come up in public comment a lot. So this is a way, again, to capture what is the best way to communicate with folks, and what ways are they willing to kind of represent and support this process in terms of communicating with others who may not have the ability to be connected. I think Dr. Shelley called it tentacles, right? How are they willing to be that tentacle to make sure that others can be able to be outreached to as well? And then there's 2 other pieces, which are literally the experiences, right? So actually asking people to share, like, have they had any experiences with police? Were they a victim of crime or witnessed crime? Okay, just giving context, because it's important you know who's coming to the table when you make these decisions. And then the last piece, just suggestions, right? Do they have any suggestions or considerations that the task force should consider? Because again, everyone is not going to be able to be on the task force. So what this represents is really how people can actually kind of show that they're a diverse group that can be represented on the task force, and it also gives you some data around the interest that people have in this particular topic and ways that they maybe can be engaged outside of the task force. And I think the last part is just literally just availability. So maybe giving them some options on when you're available. So it's a lot of information. I truthfully, we kind of gave you like the whole kitchen sink to think about, and there are some other things you can add, but we do want you to keep in mind, you don't want to give something that's so long that people are like, I don't even want to be a part of it, but you also want to give them something substantive that they know this is serious and that we're collecting some data that really is going to be impactful. And so if they're really wanting to be on the task force, then I think it is appropriate that you ask them to put some thought to it. And so the last piece is just like some language. Thank you. You know, if you want to inquire, if you want to reach out. And then there's some resources that are also shared on there if necessary. That's really more for you all to talk about. So this is, again, this is our working notes. I went through it pretty quickly for the sake of time, because I know it's 5:33 and we have a quick hard stop, but I want to just allow anyone to, you know, weigh in, ask questions, share, and I will forward these working notes over to the staff as well to make sure include in the minutes. So thoughts?
So let me ask you one question. Whoops, I'm getting some feedback. So this is, I like this a lot, is my thought. Would you also add to this the groups that we originally were thinking of appointing from, or would it be rather that then we would just reach out to those groups, make sure we reach out to those groups and make sure that they understand that this application is available? Okay, the latter then is what I.
Yes, and thanks for saying that. Yeah, I neglected to say it. Absolutely. It's the latter of those, right? Is that you have groups that you want to make sure you outreach to, and that's important to have. And so this survey would go to anyone, but specifically you want to push it to your group that you want to make sure they have the application and they can share it as well. So absolutely. And in the application, what'll come back is you'll see where those groups they represent. So yeah, great question. I neglected to share.
Oh, that's part of what I was going to add, is that communication piece is where you're going to get people to identify what groups they are a part of and that they're willing to communicate with. Because it's one, you know how you can be part of an organization, but you're not necessarily communicating with or representing that organization and what they bring to the table. That communication piece is, we're asking people to take that on from the community and say, hey, I represent the Sikh Muslim community, or I represent, and, you know, having some kind of connection to that, because these conversations can get very touchy, especially when you're talking about, this is not just your regular task force for anything else that you would ever do. Policing is very, very touchy of a subject, and you're combining policing and race, two of the touchiest subjects any community can face, and you're combining them together. So just being very thoughtful about, well, who's representing and what, you know, how they're bringing back and forth ideas is going to help.
Other thoughts from working group members? Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I've been thinking about this since our last meeting, and I think it was you, Dr. Shelley, who said, are the people on the task force representing a group or representative of a group? And I think that's a really, really important distinction. And I'm sorry, I might have missed that in my dash to the neighbors. But I think that's something that we need to think about a little bit. And I don't necessarily have an opinion on it, but I think it's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I will say that you really won't know, I think, that answer until you go through all the applications and really hear people's perspective. So for example, I could say, hey, I'm African American, right? So I represent a group, but then I could also say, hey, I'm also part of the African American, the Black Chamber of Commerce, because I'm a business owner and I'm part of the Chamber of Commerce, right? So I'm representing that group. So I think it's important that these questions be asked, like you have multiple layers there. And so when you're doing your application kind of screening, you'll be able to answer that. And so I love the communication question, because it really helps to determine, like, do you have someone that's just representing that group, or are they actually, you know, a part of a body that actually is representing a larger group of people in that similar space? So I think the survey will give you a lot of that information, but I think it's gonna, you know, when you get down to now having to hone it down to 17, you're gonna have to have that wrestling with at that
time. Any thoughts from Vice Chair Gary or Chair Downs?
I think this is a good framework. I think you know, that the pieces that I like about it is that, you know, allows people to self-identify. And so we're, you know, I think given some of Albany's size and other things, it's harder to say that we have clearly constituted interest groups that function as such. I mean, there's certainly different interests in the city, which is natural and good. And I think that it makes sense for people to have the room to say what they think, what perspective they think they bring, and then for the deciders, whoever that is, to be able to look at that and judge that. So I think this is a good framework.
Vice Chair?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm in agreement with what Chair Downs said. This is a great start. You know, as in our meeting last week when we talked about, you know, putting people in a box, you know, I think that it's a little much for me. You know, I think gender should just let them identify who they are. I mean, and that we're not forgetting anyone, right? Sexual orientation, I think that should just be open. If there's some way we can put with the application kind of like, you know, a description, you know, and let them be able to, I don't know, that could be more than we want to do. But I just think that, you know, again, we just want to make this process, or at least the application, more inviting and, like you said, not to scare people away. And so I think if we put too much, you know, like you said, it can do one or two things. It'll weed out the people that are serious and that are not, but it'll also scare people that really want to, but just they don't have the capacity to fill it out and understand what the charge is. So that's just my take on it. Like I said, it's a good framework, but I just think we need to watch our words and not to be over wordy in what we want to get across in this application.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. That was one thing I didn't say it is explicit, but this language needs to be massaged still. We don't want to put people in a box, but some of it is calling things out and really acknowledging, actually, these are things you don't typically see on an application, but also we don't want to put people in a box. I think all of them need to be open to let people self-identify, and so we can maybe state it in that way, which is absolutely fine. So,
and if it's okay, Nicole, if I could just add that, please make sure, and I'm saying this probably more for the public than anybody else, please also know that while we are presenting these ideas to the council, they still have to be brought through attorneys and processes and procedures. So it may not come back, I'm just being very honest, it may not come back looking exactly what we've put out here, but in the spirit of transparency, I have to commend the team for just allowing this to happen. But you know, and you know what, again, we can go either way. It's not necessarily our point of view, but just understand this is going to have to be brought through the staff, brought through legal. This is the CEO and me putting, I got to put my CEO hat on for a moment and just say, you know, we want to get everybody involved. We want to find out. We also don't want to be invasive to people, because there may be some folks I'm going to just give an example, the LGBTQ community. I may be part of the community, but that's none of your business. And I don't want to tell you, and I don't want to represent them. So I'm not checking that box because I'm showing up as, you know, a Black woman. And I don't want to be put in any other category. I'm just going to show up as, you know, Shelley Holt, Black woman. So we just got to be very careful and thoughtful of how you present this, but it doesn't mean it can't happen. I'm just saying, especially for the public, we probably can do it quite a bit. It may not go all the way, but we got to just put it in the perspective of legal.
Okay, so I'm wondering if we, at this point, we can agree to have the city manager work with the consultants on this and bring it back to us for a final approval at the next meeting. And if so,
sorry, can I make one more request? Is that okay?
Please.
Can we work, I would also love to have the input of the police chief, because this is again the council on policing, and we haven't heard his voice. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I do think that there needs to be the voice of the police department in this, and it's kind of been the quietest voice, and we just don't want to ignore that. Sorry.
It's a good comment. Thank you. All right, well, we don't have too much time left, a little bit over 15 minutes, but we've got another meeting coming up. Why don't we see if we can tackle the last item, which is the, I think it's, what's it called?
Is it structure and timeline?
Yeah, thank you. Structure and timeline, having trouble getting back to it. And I think the suggested, the draft framework speaks to this as well. That, oh no, I guess, oh yes, for a period of 6 months with the option for a 3 month extension. I think that's what we talked about last time. Do we have some more comments about that?
So just a quick point of clarity. Did you already do public comments for the last one? You did that in the beginning, is that correct? Okay. Just
Yes.
missed the last note. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thanks.
Thanks for being honest. No worries at all. My only, I guess my thoughts on this is that I'd like the work to get done as quickly as possible. I'd like there not to be too many artificial deadlines, so I like the idea that it could be extended. I've always thought that maybe it should meet twice a month, but that might be too much of a burden on staff. However, there's a lot of context and maybe momentum that can be lost when you only have a monthly meeting. So I'll throw that out there and see what people think about that.
I'm strongly in favor of that. I understand there's a lot of demands, but it's a highly pressing issue, and people have, we want to give them time to be able to work through it, but we also want to build the continuity that they'll be able to actually function as a group. And I agree with you that once a month is hard to sustain that.
And I'm in agreement as well, Vice Mayor. I think, twice a month would help us to continue to keep the momentum going. We don't want to paint the picture to the public that we meet and we drop the ball. So we want to know that we hear them and we're working to move towards to getting the results that we want with this force. So I'm in agreement as well.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
I would be interested in hearing from staff as to the feasibility of meeting more than once a month. I think this is going to be a heavy lift for people. And I think there's nothing worse than having meetings where we're not really ready to do what needs to be done. And we're also asking a lot of the community to meet more than once a month. So well, I'd like to know what staff really thinks and, go from there. But I'm a little hesitant to ask too big a lift right now.
City Manager, did you want to comment on that? Or maybe also the consultants can comment on whether or not they'd be able to meet such a schedule? Go ahead, City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. In terms of meeting twice a month, you all know very well, you can count on just a couple of hands how many staff we have and the number of advisory committees we have in action or meeting more than once a month. Absolutely, we can do it. We will need additional resources, and I'm looking into what that looks like and the costs associated with that given our budget complexities. But I want, again, as we've worked through this process to this date, I want to make sure that it's done well. And that means that we need the resources in place. And absolutely, we have fantastic consultants to help lead us through this process. We will also need that administrative level of assistance. And I'm not sure that we have it on staff now, given how many folks on staff are already staffing other advisory bodies. So I'm looking at that. I don't have it solved yet, but I will continue to figure out how we provide that staff support.
Okay, would it make sense then for that to be a bit of an open item and for you to come back with to us, City Manager, with more information about whether or not you're able to get more consultant resources or other resources in order to accommodate a quicker schedule?
Sure, and it'll also be a matter of Tetris with our very busy calendar. Again, I don't think it's impossible, but as you know, it's hard to even find a date for a new advisory body to meet because I've done that a few times with the newer groups, including economic development. So we'll have to take a close look at our calendar and also be cognizant of the school district and the times that they meet. So that is something I can definitely bring back. It may not be for the working group's next meeting, but I have been and will continue to work on the details of the staff support angle.
I'll chime in real quick, and I do have to get to another meeting, but I know Dr. Shelley will still be on. But I do want to echo what Nicole said, is that you do have to be mindful of resources and time, and also about what you can do in 2 weeks, right? Like who's going to be responsible for pulling things together between meetings. So I would say once a month is actually maybe it's ideal for a moment in time, but over time, we don't want to rush this either. I know there's kind of a rush to get this done. But at the end of the day, you do want to be able to adjust where needed. And again, go back to prioritizing what the task force is even going to look at. They can't do everything. So I think if that chart is really clear, again, they're going to examine policies and practices. And then really, what are those priorities, right? It can't be 50. Literally, the priorities might be 3, just to be quite honest. And so I think in the end, it's going to be important that, you kind of adjust your timeline based on the need. And it may be there's some subcommittee work that happens that doesn't require once a month, right? So just want to give you that idea as well, because it is going to take quite a bit of work. This is a complex issue. There's a lot of data to be collected that may even be outside of the task force. So I agree with Nicole. There's probably other consultants that will end up being tasked because you have data software issues you're going to have to address. There's all kinds of things that come up. So I agree, once a month might be just it. That's all you can manage at this point in time, and then make some adjustments.
Yeah, I think it bears in, one can bear in mind also that if really necessary, a special meeting of that body could be held. If for example, a meeting went long and needed to be finished in 2 weeks, you could do it that way. So there's ways to get in a little bit more time, and subcommittees, as you mentioned, perhaps. There's ways to get in more body time without scheduling more meetings or necessarily scheduling twice a month. So, yeah. Good. All right, we don't have much time left. I think we all have to go to a meeting at 6, so I don't want to stop right at 6. We need to end a few minutes before at least. There are any final comments, or I should say, does staff and consultants feel like they have what they need to move forward for the agenda and materials for the next meeting?
I think we're fine from the consultant end. I think we have what we need. We'll connect with Nicole and the staff who are, necessary to do our part in connecting. And then I just want to give one literally last comment. It's just, again, acknowledging the community, acknowledging those that have been harmed, acknowledging just the pain right now, and just recognizing that this process is hard. It's frustrating to the community. It's like, get it done now. And again, we always say we have to go slow to go fast, so we see systemic change that will last. But I just want to acknowledge the community and the pain, because it doesn't go away because some days or weeks or months have gone by. We know that there's ongoing kind of trauma and re-traumatization of lots of racial issues outside of policing, just institutional across the board. So I just want to acknowledge that and say that really clearly in this work, because this is important work. We don't want to forget why we're here. So I just wanted to say that before I jump off.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Anderson, for that, and thanks to all the public who's been participating. I see we do have one hand up, but I think I'm just going to ask that we carry over that comment until next time, as we pretty much run out of time here. And so we will have a third meeting. I think we'll have to do another. I'm not sure we've done a poll for that one, but if we haven't, we'll do a poll to find out when that next meeting is. Anything else? Otherwise, I want to thank everyone here for their participation as well. Everyone have a great rest of your day. We'll conclude now. Thank you.